So unfortunately, I finished up all of my debugging and all of the pipeline without actually hitting record. So instead, I'll go through what I had to do to get all this to work. I believe where I left off was the OAuth token. So you can see right here, I got the OAuth token. Instead of putting it in Secrets Manager, I put it into Parameter Store. The reason I did that was because parameters are free and there's a small, I believe, a very small cost associated with Secrets Manager. So I opted for a parameter just because um, I don't necessarily need all the benefits that Secrets Manager brings. I'm fine with just Parameter Store. So that's where this is. If you want to follow the same thing, you can go to, I just did this manually. You can do this through CloudFormation as well. But you go to AWS Systems Manager, then on the left here there is Parameter Store. Go ahead and click on that. There's my token, but you can create a parameter, enter in the name, enter in the value, and then hit create. It's pretty simple. So that's what I did to create the parameter. That was my OAuth token. After I got the OAuth token done, so I got my OAuth. Maybe I'll scroll back through all the CloudFormation stuff. Oh, it's not going to give me all the events. Well, that's too bad. I did have to delete it a couple more times, delete the stack before I actually got it to work. But as you can see, once I got it to work, I only had to update it a couple times. I'll go through those updates as well. So after I got this step done, the ingress step with GitHub, it actually polls. So it's not a webhook, although I wish I would have been able to get a webhook set up. I just wasn't prepared for that. The polling actually works pretty quickly. I think it was around a minute. Every minute it polls for a new change in the GitHub repository, which is pretty quick, honestly. And for a small thing like this, I don't think it was that big of an issue. So I just left it with the polling. I didn't dive into the webhook too much. The next thing that it said was that code pipeline can't have one stage, which makes sense. It needs to bring something in and then actually do something with that artifact or that code. So it makes sense why there can't only be one. So I added in this next stage. I'll just go ahead and break it to you right now. I wasn't able to get the actual code deployed, just the infrastructure, and the infrastructure through a template. So I'll go ahead just real quick through how I got the infrastructure deployment set up. So the next step, name was deployment, and this is for the serverless API. This is an AWS owned action, and it's provided by CloudFormation. There's a little brief point that I wanted to make about run order. So these are both run order 1, which doesn't give you much insight into what you can do with the run order. In a stage, you can have multiple actions. So to visualize it, this is a stage, the ingress stage, and then this is the action, the deploy action, deploy serverless API action. So this is run order 1. If let's say I had a template with extra parameters. I showed parameter store just a while ago. If I wanted all of those parameters, let's say I kept them all in a template. Let's say it was all of my environment variables for a Lambda function. I would want those to update and get deployed before I ran the Lambda function template. And the reason is because I want all those parameters up to date before the Lambda function CloudFormation template goes through, because CloudFormation will actually pick up the difference in parameters in parameter store and will, if the only thing that changes are the parameters, it will still update the CloudFormation template. So you can enforce that by having run order 1 on the parameter store template and then run order 2 on deploy serverless API. That's one way to enforce sequence. You can also run actions in parallel. So if I had parameter store and let's say, let's just say I had, for whatever reason, I had secrets manager. Let's say I had them not very secure at all, so don't do this. But let's say I had them hard-coded and stored in source in another template. So I had parameter store and secrets manager. I want to update those at the same time because they're not dependent on each other. So I can run it in parallel, and I would give those both run order 1, and then I would give deploy serverless API run order 2. Now deploy serverless API can use the parameters from parameter store, and it can use the secrets from secrets manager and they're both updated. So you can do some fun stuff with run order. Now we have configuration for CloudFormation. So the action mode, there are a couple actions that you can use. Let me find these again. That's a code build. So there's change set execute, change set replace. These two go hand in hand. Create update, which is what I'm using. Delete only, which is I haven't personally used this before, and replace on failure, which again I haven't used before. I imagine you could use create update and replace on failure, or delete. I imagine you can use some combination of these with decent success for if you try to push something through a pipeline and it enters one of these states, then you would delete it before you create it. But I'm just going to stick with create update right now because I knew that the Lambda function template in serverless API, I knew that all of that worked because I've used it before. So create update creates the stack if it doesn't exist. If the stack exists, it tells CloudFormation to update the stack. The equivalent of doing it with change sets, this is a more secure way to do it because you could potentially commit something to your repository, a template that's broken, right? Let's say that in here, let's say that I have I do that, right? Like this is invalid. This template's going to fail, but you wouldn't know this until it got to the deploy stage. And by then, it might be, it's already if you're doing a Git flow model or something like that, where you make a feature branch and then merge it into master, then you're going to have to create a hotfix to fix the template. It just might not be the best situation. So another way to get around that is doing a change set replace. Then we'll create a change set, and then in the next action you would do change set execute, which actually runs that change set. So the change set replace, when it creates it, what it's doing is making sure that that template is valid, and as far as CloudFormation knows, until it actually tries to deploy it, that template will work. If it won't work, this step will fail and it'll get kicked back. So it won't even try to execute it. Your templates will always update the stack in a safe manner once you do the change set execute. So it will make sure that CloudFormation, as much as it can tell before it actually deploys it, that everything is fine, and then it will go and deploy it. That's the safe way, a safer way to handle CloudFormation deployments in Code Pipeline. This capability named IAM, this is something where, so I'm going to go through and go through CloudFormation, because this is the way you go through manually updating or creating a CloudFormation template is the same thing that goes through here. And I ran into a couple problems while I was creating this step, or this action, with IAM roles and capabilities and some parameters. So I'll use that as my guide here. So updating the stack, the first thing you need is a template. Well, I had that pretty well figured out because I output the artifact, the source artifact, which contains this template. It's pretty much an exact copy of this, right? So I know that it's coming in here through this input artifact, and it's called source artifact. And then in here I have service API.yml. I know it's here, so I was pretty safe on that. Another point to make is that if I wanted to put a new folder in here called templates, I like calling it templates, and then put serverless API inside of templates, the equivalent here would be this change. It'd just be template/serverless API.yml. But since I don't have templates, the folders and everything set up, I just won't. I'll just call it from as if it's at the root. So that part I never really had a problem with. I just knew that that's how it all worked. So the next step would be parameters. Um, and I did have a problem. When I was testing this out, I was just messing around and just as an example, I added a parameter in here and I showed how. So I'll just go ahead and do it again. So I have this parameter called S3 bucket name, and there is a configuration item if you're deploying with CloudFormation. We get it's called parameter overrides. So parameter overrides, here we go. This is what it looks like. It would go in here, and parameter overrides is just a JSON version of putting in parameters. So key values. The key for this is S3 bucket name. So I'd put it in here. And then I can, if I want to do something dynamically, then I can substitute in a parameter like this. In the same form or fashion, I can just put in a static string and not worry about subbing. While I was doing that, I'll go ahead and recreate it. While I was doing that, I forgot to delete this parameter, but it gave a good error, so I'm going to go ahead and trigger that again. And this will also show us how fast CodePipeline actually polls. I didn't think it would poll as quickly as it did. So I made an update to my repository, and now CodePipeline will, in a certain amount of time, go out, pull GitHub. Notice that there's a difference in the commit IDs or the commit hash, pull in that source code, and then push it to this deploy stage. While we're waiting for that, I'll go ahead and say that while I was doing this, I had a little bit of trouble with roles. So originally, I did not have CloudFormation in there. I almost immediately came across an error while trying to deploy the stack because CloudFormation was not allowed to assume the role that I told it to, because remember, I told it the role to assume here. So it's trying to assume CodePipeline role, but it wasn't a valid service. So CloudFormation wasn't actually able to use that role. So there's the polling already went through. So now we're updating the API, and this should fail. This should fail. It wasn't able to assume that role. So what I did was just add in a new entry in the service, and I said that I wanted to allow CloudFormation to assume the role. That resolved that issue. The next few issues that I got to after CloudFormation could assume that role, I had the parameter issue, which I'll swing back to in just a bit. After I got the parameter issue solved, there were problems with what CloudFormation could and could not do. So all of this stuff, that CloudFormation not only did it need to be assumed, the service needed to allow, I needed to allow this. I also needed to give it access to CloudFormation itself. So now it can deploy. Then, while it was deploying, I got errors because it needed to create an API gateway, because in this template, I create an API gateway. So I had to add this API gateway, and then it also needed to create an IAM role, this Lambda IAM role here. So I gave it access to create IAM roles. This sparked an interesting a thought, though, and something I want to go back over is IAM roles. I normally get kind of freaked out by IAM roles. The reason I gave all this full access and add administrator, all this kind of stuff here, is because I'm just going to delete this pipeline whenever I'm done. I just want to get something working. I want to show the debugging process, and then I'm going to delete it. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and and push this change through, just because I thought it was a good exercise. Um, so IAM roles, instead of doing the full access in the administrator, another way that you can create an IAM role is actually by giving it its own policy document, which is just JSON. So here in CloudFormation, instead of giving it this managed policy ARN, I can just give it policies. And a policy is just a JSON document, which is more or less no more than, so I'll go into one of these policies. These are AWS managed policies, and we see this JSON. This is what would go into the policy document here. That's really all it is. Except when you're doing it, it's not something that's managed. It's, you get to manage it, so you can tell it exactly which actions it can perform on certain resources. So instead of just giving it IAM full access, I can say that I only want it to be able to create a role. It can't delete roles. And in this resource, I can say I only want it to create a role called starter Lambda function role. I will say I have not personally done this. I have seen it been done, and it's worked out really well. It's just implementing least privilege. Instead of just giving it a slew of policies that it can follow, you are limiting what it can do. Another way to get around giving it, I'm just freaked out about IAM full access, because just from a security standpoint, that can get pretty hairy pretty quickly. Instead of serverless API having an IAM role that it creates, one thing you can do is have another template, like a baseline template or security template, a role template, whatever you want to name it, and that template creates all of the IAM roles, and then in here, instead of just getting the attribute from the previously created IAM role, you could pass this in as a parameter, or you could hard code it if you even want to. That way, when you're deploying it through code pipeline, you're not actually you're not actually creating that you're not creating that IAM role on the fly. That's another way to go about doing it. So I'm going to take away the CloudFormation permissions. And it will fail. But first, I want to show, this is what that problem looks like. Invalid parameter. Well, I don't actually know what happened with that one. Template but this is, for example, this is an error that happens if you have a malformed template. So that template didn't even work. I'm not sure that. So there's the most recent push. This is CloudFormation not having the correct permission. So we'll see if it even gets past that error. My guess is it won't, because the CloudFormation template itself looked like it was malformed. Yeah, so it's not even trying. So here we see it didn't even update, which means that the template itself is malformed. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of these. And then once that uploads, I'm going to, just for the sake of time, oh wow, did it just do that? That was quick. That was a quick pull. I guess we just hit it on the right part of the cron. So that was fast. I guess we got lucky this time. I was going to manually release the change. All the release change. Oh, all that release change does is it'll manually trigger this. So instead of waiting for a poll, it'll go out and get the code and start it on its own. So this went through, and I'll tell you why. Because I left all this stuff up, so there's nothing to actually change. So not having the permissions doesn't matter. And on top of that, I did not update the code pipeline. So I'm going to just for show and tell. This is all working. Um, this is a working um, pipeline for infrastructure, which is all that I wanted to do today. The code will come at a later date. Did I change the environment? I did not change the environment variables. So I'm just going to go ahead and break this pipeline just to show what it would actually look like if it if more or less just retrace my steps just to show the errors that I saw and the reasons that I debugged the way I did. Another thing to point out, this capability named IAM. That's what the same exact thing as clicking that box is the same effect as putting that string in there. So I'm going to go ahead and update that. And I'll delete this real quick. Don't know how long it'll take. Sometimes Lambda functions take a while to delete. Oh, that's just because I'm working on it right now. So getting a lot of errors right now just because all this stuff was trying to delete in the middle of me updating that role, because that was the only change I did, right? I took out this CloudFormation assumption and I deleted the managed policy arms that were there. So that was my fault. My code pipeline role is invalid. I don't know if I believe that. So I mean, this is actually something I wasn't even trying to go about doing this. So this is interesting. This is its own kind of hidden hidden debugging session. While trying to show how I debugged earlier, I got myself in another trap. So it cannot be assumed. Oh, duh. This is the problem I was actually trying to show, but this is the problem I was trying to show through code pipeline. But because this service isn't here, right? Because CloudFormation was not able to assume this role, I can't actually do anything with this this stack. And the reason is because the IAM role that is associated with this stack is my code pipeline role. So I'm going to update this. I'm going to just fully update it. Oh no. Okay. I'm just going to bring it back to where it was before and then tear down the API gateway and Lambda function, change the permissions on the pipeline. I just did stuff out of sync is all. And then show it through code pipeline, because that's where I really saw the errors and that's what I wanted to highlight. So this might be a portion you want to skip a couple seconds through at a time, just because it might take a little bit longer. So the code pipeline rule is updated. We're cleaning up, but the cleanup doesn't matter to me. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything. And this should actually delete. Now that CloudFormation is available to assume that role, it assumed that role. It can delete everything. The Lambda function failed. Did I not have Lambda? I do have Lambda access on there. So I don't know why that failed. Let's go ahead and try it again and see what happens. Okay. I don't know why it couldn't fail before. So now I will go ahead and delete all of this, update CI/CD stack with the new IAM role with limited permissions. This is what I had originally, way back before, I think, before I even stopped to go create an OAuth token in GitHub. And now once we have this, I will re-trigger code pipeline, and it will try to reach out to CloudFormation and build the serverless API stack, and it will probably not even try to build it or deploy it, excuse me, because it can't assume the role. So it failed. The reason was because it's not authorized to perform CloudFormation. That was the key for me. Create stack. So I might not have even needed to let it assume. So let's go ahead and just see. I might not have needed that even. Let code pipeline stick with it, and then I'll add these in. So now it has CloudFormation full access, which means that it should be able to create stack. And then I'll also give it API gateway admin access and IAM full access because those are created in that template. Let's go ahead and update this again. Another option, once you really get pipelines down, something that I'm very interested in doing, something that I think could be fun, is having a pipeline that actually builds your pipeline or set of pipelines. So if you imagine, if you try to scale this out, you could have, depending on how many microservices you have, how many Lambda functions, API gateway, you don't necessarily want them all in one pipeline. So you can create multiple pipelines for it. So this might be a pipeline for a certain microservice or a certain application, whatever, and then you could have multiple pipelines. And instead of what I'm doing, which is going through CloudFormation and manually updating every time there is an update, you can set up one of these for your pipelines. So you have a pipeline that creates pipelines. And then anytime you update those pipelines, it just is kind of a cascading effect. At some point in time, though, you do have to stop. It looks like it's going to actually build. Oh, no, it didn't. You do have to kind of stop and not make another pipeline for a pipeline. But I do want to work on that at some point in time in the future. So this is why I had it assume or allow CloudFormation to assume it. Service Amazon CloudFormation. This role is invalid or cannot be assumed. Cannot be assumed is the key here. So I know that CloudFormation needs to assume this role, and that's why I have this in here. So that's obviously a common enough error that I can make it and have my pipeline not run for me. These are all the reason I'm trying to stumble through this with everyone and show the debugging that I'm doing and everything is because I think knowing how to debug and seeing errors and not being afraid to kind of handle them head on is very important in what we do. There are always going to be errors. I don't think many people can just create something that works right off the bat. If you do, it probably doesn't happen every time. So I believe everything should be in place again for this to run through. So pulls the application source again. It's not actually getting anything different because it's the same. I'm not actually updating that. The repository, now this is in progress. It's been in progress for a second now, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up. I can see that it will create, and by the time it finishes creating, this part should run through pretty easily. This will actually show up green, and we know that everything is built, everything worked well. Interesting. An internal failure. I have seen this before, but it does not happen very often. So that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen this very often at all. Since we got that far and got an internal failure, how weird. Um, it's gonna roll itself back and delete, which is fine. One thing I will point out, I can't run this again. This is gonna fail, um, but I can't actually run this again because it isn't rollback complete. There's something in. Go back up here. If you are in some sort of error state, the CloudFormation action in code pipeline really doesn't want to update it or create it if it's in an error state, which is pretty much anything that's red here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just delete it. There's the failure. We got rollback complete. That was a weird one. Yeah, you don't get internal failures often from AWS, but it can happen. Anything can happen. So I'm just gonna run it through again. If there's another internal failure, I think there might be more investigation that needs to happen. But my guess is, oh, I'm just getting all sorts of weird stuff now. It's invalid or cannot be assumed. Well, it should have access to everything. Let me check the template to make sure it is. Yeah. Well, this is just getting weirder and weirder. Huh. Well, I don't know why it could do it before, but it can't do it now, which is a little bizarre to me that it got past that stage before, but not this time. Let's go ahead and just retry that stage. This is bizarre. Let's see if we can get past that now. Yeah, got past it now. I don't know what's happening with AWS. Maybe they had some sort of actual issue between the internal failure and whatever that was. Guessing there's something else going on. But looks like it's trucking away now. Yeah, there we go. So we got the full success. We went all the way through. And just to show that the infrastructure updates are working as expected, I will go ahead and delete this environment variable. And push it. And then we should see the full pipeline go through, which is always fun. You always get to watch it go end to end. That's fun. I'll let the pulling happen, and then we'll kind of follow it through, and then check out the Lambda function to make sure that that everything's looking correct. But this was it. I'm a little upset, and I'm sorry that didn't press record when I actually went through all this for the first time. But you got to see all the errors that I encountered, more or less. Believe I still got the same amount of information in, and we got to debug backwards and then forwards again. So, and we saw the weird AWS internal error. I really don't think I've ever seen that before. Well, I've seen that before, but not that, and then it was followed up by the Lambda IAM rule problem that solved itself the third time it ran through. I don't know, maybe something happened to AWS, but either way, that's it for this demo. Um, I will hopefully be able to come back later on. Here we go. We got triggered with that poll. I will hopefully be able to come back later on and update's already complete. Wow. And show a similar thing, except instead of only updating the infrastructure, updating the function code as well. The environment variable hello world is now gone, proving that the infrastructure pipeline is working as intended. This was code pipeline going from nothing to having a working CI/CD pipeline for infrastructure, not for code. We'll get to code later. But thank you. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you later.